I bet when you started sewing that you didn't just dream of sewing something. You dreamed of sewing your own something. Uniquely you in style, fit, shape for just you and your body. It's something I hear all the time, and that is, I want to make my own sewing patterns. Quickly followed with, but I have no idea where to start. And maybe that's you. And if it is, this video, I'm going to talk through 5 different ways that you can create your own sewing patterns made just for you. Welcome back, sewing friends. I am really excited about today's topic because as the owner of a sewing school, I can tell you, I've heard this so often. When you start sewing, right? It's why I started sewing. Because I wanted to create my own unique stuff to fit me in my style I wanted. I couldn't find things at the shop and I wanted to make my own stuff. And that comes with then, I want to be able to make my own patterns because that's where it starts from, right? And so we have the options of commercial patterns, which is wonderful because there are so many options available to us in different styles, sizes, fits, aesthetics. There's a huge world out there, but it's still just not quite right, is it? And you think, I'm going to make my own patterns. And the can of worms, the rabbit hole opens up and you're left with like, how? Because there are more than one way to do anything in sewing, and particularly to be able to get your own patterns, there are multiple ways or avenues to get the same result in the end. And I've got 5 here with you today. I've tried them all, and I also talk you through not only the options, but what maybe they're best for, so you can figure out if it is best for you in your situation too, like what's going to work for you. And of course, after much trial and error, as I said, I have also, in my sewing school, I also had the recommendation of what I think works best for most home sewists as well. A way to make your own sewing patterns is to deconstruct a ready-made garment and create a pattern from it. This happens all the time in the actual garment industry, where they will buy usually designer or sometimes even vintage garments and take them back to their workrooms. They pull them apart and make patterns from them and then recreate them for their new fashion line. But of course we can do it at home as well because you know, you've got a favorite pair of jeans, that favorite blouse, that top that just fits oh so perfectly, and you want to recreate it. So you can do it by, the easiest way is to pull apart the entire garment because you can get every seam, every curve, everything. There are methods to do this without taking the garment apart, though it is a lot harder and depends on the complexity of the garment as to how well that works. But this is really great if you have, say, your favorite t-shirt, your favorite pair of fitting pants to use. And it's a simple design. You can probably get away with just kind of deconstructing it without having to take your favorite pair of pants apart. You'll see at the end where I talk about this, where often a combination of these styles is where it works, and this is really great to reference the clothes that you like. We'll talk about that later on. You can modify an existing pattern, be it a block, a sloper, a commercial pattern, and alter it to customize it to make your own pattern from there. So this is using a flat pattern method where you have your 2D paper pattern pieces and we're, reconstructing and redesigning them. This is really quite accessible because there are so many commercial patterns available. You've got blocks and slopers, and the better fitting that block or sloper is to your body already, the less work you have to do. So if you can take a well-fitting one and then make changes, so you can change the neckline, change the hemline, change from princess seams to darts, and change it up so it's the style that you want. So you pick something that is similar to your style and then you change it up a little bit to be your new style. This happens again a lot in industry when you go into a store and they have the same theme and vibe, right? So anyone in Australia will know Review. I used to love their clothes. You go in there and it's all the same kind of like fitted dress, right? And it's just different versions of that same dress, right? You've seen other stores do this. That's because they're using the same block pattern, that same like master pattern, and then just changing it up. So they're doing pleats on this skirt, scoop neck on that one, sleeves on this one, and they're just changing it up. And just like when you get a pattern envelope and you see that there's different versions of the same dress, it's the same thing. So you can learn to make all those little changes off a base pattern. So you can draft from scratch. So you can basically create that starting block sloper from scratch from your body measurements. This is done a lot in my vintage sewing books that I see. And they have all of these plotted out numbers of like go up this far, out this far to create all the curves and everything like that. There are different systems that you can use to sort of plot out using your own body measurements to get that starting sloper. It's just a different way to get to that result. So again, you would want to you usually do that to create a block pattern to start with, and then you put the design on top of that basic kind of like plain garment, and then you would design on top of that, add your different design features and different like style of the garment after that. This can be tricky because it does require a lot of pattern making knowledge, because you just know what shapes should look like, curves, what they should look like, putting in all the right measurements in all the right spots, and then having to design the actual pattern, like your garment then after it, rather than just a block. So there is quite a lot of work involved, and I definitely think it's a higher level of entry to get into that one. You can create your own patterns by draping. So you use your fabric and you create and drape on a 3D object, i.e. the mannequin. You've seen all those YouTube videos and shorts, Instagram reels of people like draping and creating a garment from the mannequin. This is what we call draping method. Rather than the flat pattern method, this is draping. So you kind of use the mannequin as your body, and you drape and you create the design of the garment on there. So you either have the choice, if you're making a one-off, you can just sew it as is, or you take that off and then create a pattern from those pattern pieces that you draped and marked on the mannequin. A lot of pros and negatives against that one. It is really great because if you're really visual, you think that seems great, I'll just like drape it and pin it where I want it, and it can work like that. Generally, if you're doing a one-off, I say that does work really great. You can just do it. When you're trying to create a pattern from that, it gets a bit harder because you kind of have to make sure you have to do all the math, right? Because when you drape it, that seam's not the side as that, so you have to like match them all up, make sure the back ones match up. Whereas if you start with a sloper, all that kind of math to getting all the pattern pieces even to one another is already done. But from draping from scratch, you have to make sure that you do all of that. And the other thing is that, well, I don't know about you, but it's really hard to find a mannequin that's exactly your body size. So very often you will see lots of people doing it, but they happen to be quite nice and slim and trim and just happen to sort of fit the mannequin size. And it's not impossible. You could just make your own mannequin, right? I have a whole course in Vintage Sewing School on how to like recreate your body shape, even not just your size, but your shape into a mannequin and make your me mannequin, as I call it. And so then you could drape onto that mannequin. But again, still the same principles apply. Like that's a whole nother thing you have to do, is get your mannequin to your size, and then you have to learn the draping and everything like that. And if it's a one-off or repeatable item, you need to consider your time investment for it. So there's lots of pros and cons there. And then finally, you could have someone else make your pattern for you. Yeah, it is a thing. So you can actually contract out, whether it's a local dressmaker, someone, a factory nearby, or on Fiverr.com online, you can have someone make a pattern for you, be it in person or a digital version, digitally create the pattern. They're just different methods to create a pattern that you can still do the same. So you can absolutely, if you're just well off, and maybe that's worth the investment for you, that it's just in the way too hard basket, you really want your own pattern fitted to you, your own body measurements, have someone else do it. It might be worth it. So what do I recommend though? Because that's a lot of options and they're all quite different. And well, as I was talked about earlier, often a combination of these is what is good. But my preferred method, and my one that I recommend to all my students, because I think it gives us the most, it's a lot of work to create a pattern. So you want to get the most amount of reward for that effort that you put in. So what I've found is that using a block pattern, a sloper, an existing commercial pattern, i.e. preferably one that fits you well, we'll get to that, then making changes to that is what works best. So 1, invest your time and effort, energy into finding a simple, what I call a block pattern. So it's just a basic shift dress, for example, right? Or a basic A-line skirt or a basic pant, right? These are our block patterns. Invest the time in making all the mock-ups, all the toiles, all the everything that's required to get that to fit you really nice. Because then once you do, you can just make a few small changes to the pattern to create a whole nother garment, right? A whole nother look of a different thing. So for example, on a dress, you can change the neckline. You can change the skirt to be pleats, to be a shift. You can change where the darts are. You can add a short sleeve, a long sleeve. You can add a poofy balloon sleeve. You see what I mean, right? These are all little changes. Just like we talked about when you look at the pattern envelope, and there's like 6 different styles, you can learn to do that very easily. And when you've already invested the time and energy into creating the right size and fit pattern block, all those fundamental print, like pattern making foundational skills that you've had to learn there to get that right, that's all you need to then be able to do the design features that you want to change it up. And so it's very little work at that point once you've got your pattern that fits you quite well. That investment, that time, I feel is highly rewarded when you just then change it up a little bit to create a new design. And each time you do the design, I mean, you trace off the pattern and you make a whole nother pattern, you label it, you give it a fancy name like all the pattern companies do, you take records, photographs, because then that is that pattern. And you can just go when you change, like next time you want to make something, you pick up that new pattern and you just make it. All of the hard work of the fitting, the designing, the everything is already done. And that's when sewing becomes really quite quick, is when we take that, all the pattern making out of the equation. So a combination of this is using that, but then looking at clothes that you already own, not to say clone them, but to use them as examples. You can measure, the crotch depth is this. I look at the curve of the crotch underneath for a pair of pants, for example. Look at how long the bodice into the waist is on your favorite dress and it hits just at your waist. You measure and you replicate that on your block pattern. So using your garments that you use as references, not say deconstructing them from scratch. Then I would also use the mannequin, not to drape a pattern, but I use it to have a look and like help design along the way. So you can put it on, you can stand back, you have a look, you play around, you pin things on there, and you see how well it works as you do stuff. Not actually draping the pattern, but just using it to assess your design and style and make sure everything's flowing really nicely along in the process. I have one final thought for you to ponder before you go off trying to make your own patterns. And that is when people come to me and they say, I want to make my own patterns. I say, fantastic. I am so excited for you. The next thing I would say is that, well, when you do make your own pattern, remember that pattern that you make yourself doesn't come with sewing instructions. So can you sew a pattern, any pattern? Can you just pick up any pattern and sew it without written or anything sewing instructions? I know, now I really got you thinking. So it is another consideration to make. If you make it from scratch, it doesn't come with any sewing instructions. So you need to have a certain level of sewing skill to be able to make something up. And that is another reason why I think starting with commercial patterns or a block or a sloper that already has some sewing instructions with it is helpful, because you can just make your slight alterations, but the sewing methods will still pretty much be the same because it's almost identical, like it's very similar style. So you've got that help, that backup, that support with those sewing instructions as well. So just something for you to ponder when you think, I want to make my own patterns. I'll be making a follow-up video shortly about how to create your own pattern when you have non-standard measurements, right? You're thinking that sounds great. I've got a block, a sloper, commercial pattern, but my body measurements are nowhere near that. How do I even start doing that process? That's what I'm going to make a follow-up video about. So I'd love to hear all your questions, pains, struggles down below, because I'll help answer them in that next video. Until next time, my sewing friends, happy sewing. Bye.